also tell you what the availability is that you can draw down as well. But there's also invoice discounting. This is where you keep collecting the payments, but the finance company gives you the funds up front. Both of them are, I've used both of them, and they seem to be very similar, but there's one whereby it stamps the invoice. For example, like invoice factoring, they'll stamp the invoice, send it to the client, and they will say in that invoice that this invoice belongs to the bank or whichever factoring company it is, because there's lots of factoring companies besides banks, for example, and that this is the sort code account number or IBAN number that you're to pay, SWIFT number, routing number that you're to pay, and you must pay us directly. You do not pay the customer. This is a legal agreement and you must pay us directly. Whereas with invoice discounting, where you get to collect the payments because the bank has given you the money, for example, up front, but you've got to pay it back. So each option, it has its pros and cons, and I'm going to break it down for you in this class today, for example, this YouTube live. So, but I want to explain to you why invoice finance is useful. So, would you use invoice finance? Many businesses do, because they face cash flow gaps when clients delay payments. This can create real problems that you need to pay your staff wages on time, purchase inventory, or just keep the lights on. Invoice finance bridges the gap. So allowing you to access funds as soon as your invoice is issued without waiting weeks or months for your clients to pay. Sometimes it's months. When I say months, I mean like 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. So this is the reason why it is good in one way, but if it's over 3 months, then you get into trouble. There's a block there, for example. So how does invoice finance help you pay your staff wages? Well, let me talk to you about the real power of invoice finance. It helps you to pay your staff wages weekly, bi-weekly, monthly. Every business needs cash to cover payroll, but many small businesses struggle when clients don't pay on time. It's a real struggle for small businesses. I've been there myself. It really is. So let me give you an example. Imagine that you've just completed a project and the client agrees to pay you in 30 days. They made an agreement to even pay you monthly, and you're doing the work, for example, but payroll is due in 10 days and you need that cash to cover employee salaries. So what would you do in that situation? So this is where invoice finance steps in. And with invoice finance, you don't need to wait the 30-day period or more, for example. You can just get up to 90% of the invoice, and this is the UK I'm referring to, up front, ensuring that your staff get paid on time. And America also has this facility as well. Most companies, most organizations use this as a good way to get cash flow in, especially when you're paying payroll weekly or every 2 weeks, for example. So I've worked with clients that have used Invoice Finance to avoid missing payroll deadlines. One of them was a small business, and I'm going to explain that it was, they were struggling because people were paying late. For example, it affected them, it affected their business, and they had lots of hours coming in and they were increasing, but the money wasn't coming in fast enough to pay for the staff wages or all of the staff wages and to keep the operations moving. So they had to take a step forward and do invoice finance. And it's quite simple really to get started, and it takes probably about a week, 2 weeks to get set up. It really shouldn't take 2 weeks, it really should be within that week. But your partner is a finance provider, so you'll be submitting your outstanding invoices to. So the provider will advance you a portion of these invoices, and then you, the provider, pays it back when the client settles, for example. So for example, if the bank gives you 90% of that invoice and then the client then pays all of the invoice, you then get the 10% on top, but obviously you pay a fee and that just gets taken out. But it is a good cash flow thing. That's why working with business to business is a lot better. This is the only way that this can work. It won't work with business to customer, for example. So now I can imagine that some of you think, yeah, this is great. You may be using invoice finance or factoring right now. I'd love to know in the comments whether you're using invoice finance or invoice factoring or ADP, whereabouts you are in the world, what do you use? Is it working for you? Is it helping you to manage cash flow, to help you to pay your staff? I'd love to know, I'd love to hear it from you, because I'm looking at this live today is by me talking about this, but it's also good to get your feedback as well. So do you have a specific question about invoice finance? Because it does work in different industries or situations. So say for example, if you were in construction business and you were doing work for a company, then you can use this. But if you're doing work for an individual, like a consumer, then that's a different thing. You can't use invoice finance for that reason. So you may have a roof that you've just done and you haven't been paid for it, but yet you've got your labourers waiting to be paid. So it all depends with who you're working with. That's why they get the money up front, so that they can at least pay half, for example. So some examples that I've just given you. What I'd like to also say is, with regards to invoice finance and factoring, it is a good thing to have. I will say that, but there are some downsides to having it as well. So I wanted to be up front with you, just to give you the information. I'll just drink my tea, 1 second. It's the thing, when you talk, you kind of your throat gets dry. And then you've got lighting that makes you a bit dry as well. So apologies for that. So invoice, finance and factoring. Would I do it? Yes, I would. If I could, I would. For you, it would be a good reason for you to do it if you're paying staff weekly, or even every 2 weeks, or even monthly, because people don't pay when they say they're going to pay, for example, for whatever reason, and that then puts you in a difficult situation. So if you've enjoyed today's session, I would love for you to like and subscribe if you can to the channel, so that you get tons of other content on business finance, because I'm going to be covering a lot about, even though I'm not a finance broker or I'm not registered with the Financial Conduct Authority, for example. I'm just talking to you in general about how my clients have found it, as well as how I've found it. If I've used it, I will talk to you about what I've used, for example, because it will help you to grow your business, and it will also relieve the stress and pressure from you, because there's nothing worse than, you've been in business for years, for example, and some of you are paying a registered manager, and you're doing this work, but this person may not be paying you on time. So you've got to look at who your customers are. Move and switch if you can. Yeah, there's the private clients, for example, which is great and wonderful. I'm not saying to not do that, but you need to have business to business so that you can do these invoices for example, because you need to protect yourself as well. Don't rely on 100% consumer, because that can be a problem for you as well. So think about that balance. I always say the 80-20. Then make sure that that you've got clients that are reliable and that are going to pay you, for example, and that you've got a relationship with, for example. So I'd love to know how you're getting on with your invoice finance, with your invoice factoring. How is that working for you currently at the moment? Because I've explained some situations to you, for example. That's the reason why I used to drive for an hour and a half every week, delivering, literally hand delivering invoices, because I would email and I would get a lot of, oh, I haven't received it. Oh, can you resend it? Oh, can you resend it? And it's like day after day. And then next minute, you're in 5 days. And you're like, hang on a minute, you haven't even looked at this invoice. And it's now 5 days, and I'm expecting to be paid on day 30. So you really, directors, you really need to make a decision as to how aggressive you're going to be with chasing payments.